Welcome everybody. In today's training session, we're going to talk about power supplies. And power supplies are used throughout the Midco systems to power up our amplifiers. Every one of our amplifiers in the system requires voltage in order to continue the RF signal down the system plant. Some of the things you're going to need for those power supplies are you're going to need 2 ground rods. You're going to need conduit. You're going to need our power supply cabinet. You're going to need our power supply base to all get started. As you can see, we've got our trench dug out here. We have it coming from our power supply base where it's going to go up to our riser point. As you can see up above me, this is where we're going to get our power source from our electric company to go ahead and supply that power to our power supply cabinet. When we do bring these risers up on the pole, it's important that we remember to not violate our climbing space. It's important to bring all the risers all up in one location. We have our PVC pipe put into place that's going to run us all the way over to where we're going to set our power supply cabinet. In this particular situation, we have a node cabinet we're placing the power supply next to. Now, anytime that we place a power supply within 6 feet of a node cabinet, we're going to run a ground wire from our power supply over to our node cabinet, and that's how we're going to bond it. Here you can see we've got our ground rod in place. We've got our conduit that's going to take our RF coax up into our node cabinet where our power inserter is going to be able to insert that power into our cable system. We have our base here. We have 1 ground rod out here. We have it driven 6 feet away. Now it's important that we have our ground rod 6 feet. We can simply measure, we can take it out, we can place and verify that we have at least a 6-foot separation with our ground rod. When you run your ground wire from the ground rod, you're going to run it up over, you're going to run a continual loop. That's going to come up into the middle of our base here to tie into our power supply cabinet. The other ground wire we have attached here for our powers for our electrician when he places the meter on side of the power supply cabinet. Now, when we have a node cabinet in place, there's going to be 1 additional ground wire run from inside the power supply cabinet up over to go ahead and bond our node cabinet to our system. As you can see, we've got our trench all filled in. We've got a good 6 inches of P-rock placed down here. Now, P-rock acts as a drain tile. It helps keep your base solid. The last thing we want is one of our power supply cabinets leaning, especially once the meter's been hooked to it, the electric line's been hooked to it. There's not much give at that point if a power supply does lean. One way to ensure that you do get a good base, you could take a level and you can simply work it out, leveling off before you add that base. So you can see we have our ground rod. Again, 1 will run up inside the base. It's already buried. We have 1 that comes back up for our electrician. We have our pipe already installed into our node cabinet. We also have 6 inches of P-rock placed in there. Again, we want to make sure that conduits come up in the middle of the node cabinet or whatever pedestal we're placing, and we want to have a good 6 inches of P-rock. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set our base on, so let's get started. We've got our base placed on, our barrier mat. Now your barrier mat, you'll do the final trim on that once you set the cabinet on. We've got our holes poked out of where the 4 bolts will mount the cabinet on there. You only really need to cut open the holes that are going to be used. So that way the barrier mat provides a better barrier. Now, you also want to leave your ground rod up, exposing your ground nut as well. So the electrician has the final inspection on this. They'll drive the ground rod down farther in that case. Again, we have our electrician's ground wire. That runs underneath the base, up and over. We have our continual ground wire that comes from the ground rod to here. No cut comes up, and this will go into our ground bar inside. So with that left, all we need to do is set the cabinet, so let's get started. So we've got our cabinet all mounted on. One thing you notice is the distance between our power supply and our node cabinet. You always want to make sure that your meter is on the opposite side of wherever a node cabinet, if you're placing a power supply with the node cabinet. That being is the electric company needs at least 3 feet to disconnect the meter in the event they need to disconnect that meter. So if it happens that you do end up having to put the meter on this side, you have to have at least a minimum of 3-foot distance between the two. As you can see down here, we've got it bolted in. We've trimmed off our barrier mat. We've got our pipe coming back up for our coax to feed from the node to the power supply, where we'll insert the power into our HFC system. We've run the ground wire to the front. We've tied it into our ground bar, and all we need to do is put on the lid. It's important though, before you leave here, that you place these stickers on. They go in a set of 1 for each door. So make sure that you place on each side of the door, you're gonna place these stickers. And that's all. So thanks for joining. We hope you learned something from this. Have a great day.